6:30, so I'm going to start. Everyone can take their seats, please. Good evening. Welcome to this special meeting of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee to look at Marketing Gloucester Limited. I'm just going to go through the procedural preliminaries at the start of the agenda, and then I'm just going to say a few words about how tonight's meeting runs. It's slightly unusual in terms of how we do the scrutiny meeting. So, in terms of apologies, I've had apologies from Councillor Hay, for whom Councillor Luck is substituting, Councillor Bullen, for whom Councillor Hansdorf is substituting, and then Councillors Organ and Finnegan. Other than that, we should be a full house unless anybody wants to make me aware of anyone else. Oh, and John Topping can't be here, so we're wrong. Okay, are there any declarations of interest? Would anybody like to make the declare the existence of the party whip in relation to any item on the agenda? No? Okay. Before we get to public question time, I'm just going to talk about how the meeting will run. Can I make everyone aware that the meeting may and indeed is being filmed, and that those doing so must not obstruct the view of the press, public officers or members. So as I said, I just want to talk briefly about how I intend to run the meeting tonight. After I finish speaking now, there will be an opportunity for public questions at the start of the agenda, lasting for 15 minutes. We're considering an issue that residents are rightly very concerned about, so I do want to say public involvement from the gallery. Each member of the public is allowed one question with no opportunity for a supplementary, but there is precedent that should there be time remaining of 15 minutes, a member of the public may have a second question. I will allow some preamble to set the scene, but I would remind members of the public to please ask a question and not make a statement, or else I will prompt you to bring you to a question. During the meeting after that, we will first hear from Councillors James and Watkins about their respective, wearing their respective hats as former chairs of Marketing Gloucester, and we will then hear from the other witnesses listed on the paper that went out earlier: Councillor Steve Morgan, the Chaplain for Property and Leisure, Jonathan Lund and Anne Brincroft, Corporate Directors, Steve Brown, the former Interim Chief Executive of MGL, and John Beattie, the Managing Director. We have sent out some prompts, and I will invite each of the witnesses presenting to make some brief opening remarks should they wish to do so, and they may wish to structure it around those prompts. They may wish to raise other issues. I will then open the floor to questions from members. I hope that's clear to everybody, and if not, please do make yourself known to me at any point. I would just remind members that I do expect this meeting to be conducted in our usual collegiate manner, with a view to fact-finding and setting a course to prevent a reoccurrence of what we're examining tonight. We are here to act as a critical friend and to make sure we put in place some solid recommendations to prevent this situation from happening in future, and to ensure that the new committee and new administration, whoever that may be, who comes into power after May, has a solid foundation on which to build. With that said, I will now move to public question time. Are there any public questions? Yes, please.
Good evening, Chairman. My first question is, please can you confirm why, when Councillor Wilson asked Councillor James at the Overview and Scrutiny meeting on the 19th of December, whether Jason Smith, the ex-CEO, had claimed personal expenses whilst working for MGL as a contractor, Councillor James stated that he could not confirm whether he had claimed expenses, as he had not been involved in that level of detail. This, in fact, is simply not true, as Councillor James was the account signatory on the main account, signed off the CEO's invoices for his services, and also signed off the CEO's expenses, in spite of the fact that the CEO was self-employed and Marketing Gloucester should not have been paying his expenses. So that's my first question. I do have a supplementary question if there's time.
I imagine there will be. I don't know the answer to that question, but what I will say is that I imagine that may be something that members of the committee wish to explore in further detail tonight, and I can see Councillor Wilson is nodding at me, so I feel we may get an answer to that question over the proceedings. Does anyone else in the public gallery have a question before I have the opportunity to ask a second? I see no indications, in which case would you like to ask a second question, please?
Thank you, yes. So my second question, there is a bit of preamble which I can say before or after the question, but I'll ask the question first. Please can you confirm that the committee will debate the matter relating to the whistleblowing information from 2014 that should have been retained in line with the whistleblower policy at that time, and that there will be an investigation? I've requested a copy of the report under a subject access request, and I was advised by the Head of Audit Risk Assurance in an email that although a copy of the report was provided to the Council's interpretation of the policy was that it was not a whistleblowing allegation against the Council, and therefore there was no requirement to register it or retain it in the whistleblowing register. The very fact that the Council's whistleblowing policy was invoked means the policy should have been followed in its entirety. Nowhere in the policy did it state that it was optional whether to retain information. The whistleblower about the CEO contained concerns relating to inappropriate behaviour, and I'm most concerned that by not retaining this information, the City Council has removed trace of this and has prevented any comparisons being made should any further complaints have arisen about the ex-CEO. And this, in my opinion, is a far more serious aspect to the decision taken not to retain the information. I know there's a financial element as well, but to be quite honest, this personal element I think is far more serious.
Again, from conversations with colleagues earlier, I think these issues that will come up during the course of the meeting.
Chair, before the lady goes, do you think we could have her name or whether she's got any declaration of interest at all that she wants to disclose?
Members of the public aren't required to declare interest. Thank you. Are there any further questions from members of the public before I proceed? No. Are there any petitions and deputations? There were not, in which case I'll proceed to the main body of the meeting. Can I invite Councillor James and Councillor Watkins to take their seats, please? Thank you both for agreeing to come this evening. I do really appreciate it. I feel like we've done a lot of scrutiny of this matter, and this will be the last opportunity before the election to do so. So again, you have my thanks on behalf of the committee. Can I invite either of you to make any opening remarks before we move to questions from members, should you wish to do so? Councillor Watkins.
Thank you, Chair. I just wish to obviously make a huge caveat in the sense that I'm no longer a Director of Marketing Gloucester and that the company is now with the liquidator. So I can't be here this evening to answer on behalf of the company. I can only bear witness to the events leading up to the point in which the company went into liquidation, and any questions that are specifically related to creditors or the future of the company will be better placed by the liquidator, who will be undertaking his own full review of what's happened as well and reporting back in due course, which will be later in the year.
Thank you. Councillor James, do you wish to say anything?
Well, I've got lots of points I wish to make, Chair. I can go through them all now if you want to. I'm clearly happy to take questions, and some of them may get answered covered in response to any questions that arise, but I wouldn't want to miss anything. I think the first point before we move on to the substantive issues are I am disappointed that the report was only published yesterday. And that has allowed inadequate time to prepare, particularly for those of us who work. And then the running order was only published today, and I finished work half an hour ago, so that is unfortunate. I also am a little bit surprised about people who've been asked to give evidence and those, particularly those that haven't. I'm surprised that the former chief executive or bookkeeper haven't been asked to give evidence, because they're in a position to answer questions that nobody else could answer. And indeed, as I put to you when you originally invited me to this meeting, that other board members, especially those who had a closer involvement with the finances of the company and a closer involvement with the UK Digital Retail Innovation Centre, they could well have shed light on issues this evening in a way that I won't be able to do so. If we need to continue. If I go through the report that's in fact, I do have a number of issues with the report and its content, and this may help to set off some of the debate. So first of all, in relation to some of the comments attributed to the insolvency practitioner, I've not seen any report from the insolvency practitioner or had any context put to that report. I think the difference between the reduction in funding to Marketing Gloucester and perhaps the reduction in funding to other bodies or external contractors is when it happened in other cases, there was a reduction in the expectations or in the contractual requirements on those organisations or companies, but that wasn't what happened in the case of Marketing Gloucester. So, for example, if you take the case of Amy, well, Amy would have agreed to cut the grass fewer times, or to employ fewer people to sweep the streets, or to cut hedges, as indeed they did. But that didn't happen in the case of Marketing Gloucester. There was no reduction in what was expected of them, and indeed in the case of the events that they were required to run, those were actually added to, and I'm sure we'll come back to that a bit later. And in relation to the statement here that the company failed to cut costs, that's not my understanding. That certainly wasn't the way in which things were presented to the board. But of course there was a limit to the extent to which costs could be reduced, because of course resources were still needed to put on the events that they were required to by the council. And documents that I have, and I've made it quite clear through you, Chair, that I'm happy to share all the documents and emails that I have that are relevant, show that the funding and management agreement and the service level agreement should have been changed to reflect the amount of funding that was going to the company from the council. But as far as I can tell, that just didn't happen. I'm not sure what is meant by the reference to high-risk projects that the company entered into. I think the highest risk project that the company would have entered into was the Tall Ships Festival, and we know that what happened in 2017 when it took place literally a day or two after the Manchester terrorist attack did have a significant impact. But that was a project that it was required to organise by the council, although the council funded only a small part of it. I am pleased to see the confirmation that there is no police investigation underway. It's a shame that I didn't find out that that was the case other than reading it hidden away in this report. It's a shame that it wasn't trumpeted in the same way as it was when we were told that a police investigation was underway, because it's been a very upsetting and distressing and damaging thing for those involved, including me, to have that inference out there in public. I am conscious I'm hogging a lot of the time here, but these are all important points. Moving on to where it's headed up, officer response, and taking the comparison with the Aspire Trust. Now, I'm a great fan of what Aspire have done in terms of reducing and then eliminating their reliance on the council's grant funding to support their activities. But I think the two crucial differences there are that the Aspire reductions took place over, I think, a period of at least 5 years, whereas the Marketing Gloucester funding reductions took place over 2. And of course, Aspire have a product they can sell. They can sell more gym memberships, they can get more people to come in to swim, they can reduce activities that are more community-based and replace them with those that are more commercial, which indeed they did. That is not something that it was possible for Marketing Gloucester to do. In relation to the ability, well, first of all, the ability to pay the creditors and the financial and operational practices. I think 2 points I would make in response to that. As I said the last time, the general difficult financial position of the company was communicated to council officers on many occasions, although I accept that the figure for the cash flow wasn't, because it wasn't known until after the 2019 Tour Ships Festival. But I think in reality, and those involved in finances will know this, if the company loses money year after year, there will come a point when the money runs out. And there were losses in 3 consecutive years. I think 1 year was 50,000 and 2 years were around 100,000 at the time when the funding reductions were first implemented. And for a period of time you can get people to pay in advance, you can hold off paying your creditors, which is something I'm never comfortable with, but you can do that to keep the thing afloat, but eventually the money runs out. And clearly the council was aware of those losses because it provided the going concern statement that went with the annual accounts submitted to Companies House year on year. Sorry, I am coming to the close with my initial comments. The comments about not knowing about the financial and operational practices at MGL until the Grant Thornton report also strikes me as a little bit odd, because I did make the point of going back through the Audit and Governance Committee papers after reference was made to it at a number of meetings. And I had, as I mentioned in the previous meeting, I'd never been informed of any of the discussions or the outcomes of the deliberations at the Audit and Governance Committee. But it's since been confirmed to me by the audit manager, first of all, that, just look at find my notes again, there was a recommendation in one of those reports that the council assist Marketing Gloucester in strengthening its financial controls, and I was informed by the audit manager that has been confirmed as implemented. So that doesn't seem to tally. And indeed, the Audit and Governance minutes on the 19th of September say the Corporate Director confirmed legal documents and financial management arrangements were now in place. So I think it's important that we remember that. And I think the final point I just wanted to make before allowing questions, and there will be other points I wish to bring in, but I think the suggestion has been made in the past that the council didn't know about the UK Digital Retail Innovation Centre project until it was open, I think was the phrase that was used. Simply isn't true. I've now seen a copy of the notes of the performance meeting, the Marketing Gloucester performance meeting, dated the 29th of September 2017, and these were circulated to Audit Committee members recently. And there are a number of references to that. It says the outcome of the awaited on Retail Lab application to LEP. And it was also noted that if the Retail Lab bid for funding was successful, MGL would be relocating from King's House to the Eastgate Centre in the first quarter of 2018-19. So as I say, this shows that the council was aware as far back as September 2017. So I'll just leave it there for the moment, but I clearly will want to come back with another number of other points throughout the course of the meeting.
Thank you, Councillor James, that was really helpful. I'll now open the floor to questions from members, and we'll begin with Councillor Hilton.
I'll come to the point that Councillor James has just mentioned about his knowledge of the UK Digital Resource Innovation Centre being created and established, and also we know that he was photographed with the City MP and others at the official opening of the facility in the Eastgate Shopping Centre. Well, what I want to know is, because you previously said you had no idea that the company was being set up as a subsidiary of Marketing Gloucester Limited, and you were chair of Marketing Gloucester Limited, and you didn't seem to understand it was set up as a subsidiary, or that Jason Smith and the bookkeeper appointed themselves to the board. Now, how on earth did that happen under your chairmanship? Surely you should have known what's going on and stopped it. And the other point you mentioned is about finances and the fact that they were being cut back and that you were being asked to do projects which the Marketing Gloucester could not possibly afford. Surely, as chairman of the board, if I was chairman of the board, I would just instructed the board to return a note to the council saying we do not have enough money to do this, this and this, and therefore we will not be doing it in order to protect the company's financial affairs. You didn't do that at any one time. So don't you think that you failed on a number of occasions to properly give oversight of Marketing Gloucester Limited in the 8 years that you chaired the board?
Well, I think before I answer the specific points that Councillor Hilton raised, I think it's an important general point to make, because I think Councillor Hilton has clearly prejudged the outcome of this inquiry, because he's already said on social media that it was all my fault, and members of scrutiny, according to the Ministry for Housing, Communities and Local Government guidance notes, which this committee considered back in May 2019, should be independent-minded and should not prejudge the outcome. So I do question whether Councillor Hilton should be taking part in this at all. And I think the other point that is worth making is, and this is an important comparison, although it's not on the same subject, there have been some very serious allegations made about what happened at Gloucestershire Airport in recent days. And according to those reports, those allegations go back quite a number of years. And of course, Councillor Hilton was chairman of the airport company. Now, I could not unreasonably ask what he knew about those. But I think I'm rather more reasonable than Councillor Hilton, and I don't think, as a non-executive chairman of that, he would have known the detail of what was going on, any more than I knew the detail day to day of what was going on within Marketing Gloucester. But just to move to the answer the question directly, what I've said before, and I think coming along here tonight and questioning me again rather than calling others who you haven't questioned before, what you risk doing is just having me repeat the answers I've given very clearly before. But the question about the subsidiary, I did not say I wasn't aware a subsidiary was being formed. I said I was not told at the time it was done, or that the chief executive, or former chief executive, or bookkeeper had appointed themselves as directors. But a number of board members were aware that it was the intention for a subsidiary to be set up, because the chief executive, and I have a copy of this email, sought advice from a board member, professional board member, on the best way to do that. Just moving back to the Councillor Hilton's second point, and I know it's trying to score a party political point here, but it's important. I told officers on a number of occasions, and the chief executive told me that he made officers aware on a number of occasions of the very difficult financial position at the company. But the difference between the example of the airport that I made and Marketing Gloucester is that Marketing Gloucester was a technical company. And there were times, and I've said this before, there were times when the board did not want to go ahead and organise events that it had no money to do, but they were ordered by officers to do so. And in the situation with a technical company is you have to take the orders from the shareholder, because effectively it has to be like a department of the council, and that is the crucial difference. And the company was told, and I have documentary evidence of this, was told to go ahead and do it.
Told to go ahead and do it by your own administration, which you were leader of the council.
I just want to say, you raised the issue about the MHCRG guidance, and scrutiny members being independently minded.
Yes,
It is of course for individual members to make a judgment as to whether they should take part in proceedings. Councillor Hilton has decided that he's capable of being independently
Well, I think
minded.
others will draw their opinion in the extent to which he is independently minded. I don't believe
that is
he
the case. Councillor Hilton's made that decision. Councillor Hilton, go ahead.
In 2014, there was whistleblowing allegations about Marketing Gloucester Limited. It's impossible now for members of this committee to get sight of a copy of the report that was done into the investigations that went ahead. Do you have a copy in your possession? Would you know of any other board directors of the company that have a copy of that report in their possession? And if not, why has this council lost that copy during your time as leader of the council?
Well, I think the leader of the council has many responsibilities, but organising the filing system isn't one of them. I don't have a copy. I was asked that question under freedom of information. I think it would have been inappropriate for me to keep a copy for so long for an organisation that I'm no longer involved with. And as if the head of policy and resources was here tonight, he'd be able to confirm that all of my old files and emails, I think about 2017, were lost when IT switched over my laptop, so I had nothing prior to that. But what I have been able to do is to contact two of the professionals who were involved at that time, and they've both confirmed that my recollection of events is correct, that following the allegations that were made, there was an external investigation which came at no inconsiderable cost, that report was presented to the board of Marketing Gloucester with the HR professional who undertook that investigation, with them present. It found that there was no substance to the allegations, and the chief executive was reinstated, and those making the allegations were informed as such. But it's also worth noting, and this has been confirmed to me by the employment solicitor who was involved at the time, that there was an attempt at mediation to try and get all parties back into the business, as he called it, but that unfortunately was not successful. So clearly every effort was made to deal with it properly, but unfortunately those differences couldn't be resolved. But you know, I've had confirmed to say by those two professionals that my recollection is correct, and there was no substance to the allegation. And it's also worth underlining the fact that the communication of that board decision to the employees affected wasn't undertaken by me, it was undertaken by a separate board member. So, and I have no idea whether any other board member still holds a copy. That I have no way of knowing, and it's not something I've asked them about. But I would have thought after all this time and in the circumstances we're in, I would be surprised if anybody still did. I'd be very pleased because it would further underline the points I've made, but I'm just not aware of that.
Thank you. I'm going to go to Councillor Wilson now, please.
Thank you, Chair. I've actually got questions for both Jenny and Paul, if that's okay. I'll start with Paul. With reference to, after the whistleblowing allegations back in 2014, one of the actions this council took was to arrange for an internal audit of Marketing Gloucester. And it took them some time, but I was off the council between 2015 and 2016, but when I got back on, it was just about being finished at that stage 1 year later. They produced a full audit report. Did you read the full audit report?
No, if I said at a previous, I can't remember if it was the scrutiny or at full council, nobody ever made me aware of that. And this is something I followed up with the audit team, and they've confirmed that is correct, that it was never brought to my attention. So I've only gone back through the audit and governance report since 2014 recently, but they've confirmed that it would be a matter for senior management to communicate to me, and they never did.
As chair of the company, don't you think you should have been?
Well, I can only read something if I know it exists, and it was never brought to my attention.
I'm surprised by that. Okay. Second question, as regards the question for the member of the public. I think what she was referring to at the call-in meeting, I asked a question about the CEO signing off his own expenses, from what I can recall. I think your answer was you didn't get involved in the day-to-day financial dealings. But from the question I've just heard, it sounds like you were actually an authorised cheque signatory. So is it true that you would have been signing those off?
Well, before I answer, I think Councillor Wilson ought to reflect on whether he should take part in this, whether he's independent-minded as well, because he has previously said that he's a personal friend of the person making the allegations. So I really think you should declare that interest.
Can I clarify?
Yes.
Yes, I said I knew her personally because she contacted me as regards the whistleblowing allegations back in 2014, 2015.
Thank you.
Not a personal friend.
Thank you for the clarification, Councillor James.
So I think Councillor Wilson should reflect on whether he should take part in this and whether he is indeed independent-minded as the regulations require. In terms of expenses, now I've answered all of this before. I don't believe I ever signed off an expenses claim by the former Chief Executive. What I did used to do when he was acting on a self-employed consultancy type basis when he was initially employed, I did sign off his invoices at that point. That was something that I asked the board whether they wished to add an extra level of control on, or whether they wanted someone else to do it or a second person to do it. But they declined and said they were quite happy for me to sign those off. In terms of whether I was a cheque signatory, I think going back, crikey, 6 or 7 years, I think, occasionally I did sign cheques because we did have a period where the previous Chief Executive, not the one immediately, but there was a time where the first Chief Executive, Graham Walker, left, and that's when I took over as chair, and Chris Aldershaw acted as Chief Executive for some time, and that was something that he wanted me to do. I never really saw it as the chairman's role to be signing off signing the cheques for the telephone bills, but there was a short period of time when I did that. I've not signed any cheques for a long time because they barely exist these days. Everything is done by, pretty much everything's done by online banking. So I've had no involvement in signing off invoices invoices other than the Chief Executive's invoices when he was self-employed consultancy for 6 or 7 years. I thought, I guess, about 5, 6, 7 years, but a long time.
If I could ask Jenny a question. It goes back, and it's one of the issues that's got me most worried about, if I'm honest. Starting with the Grant Thornton report, it refers to the setting up the DRIC, which they say they have great concerns about. Their recommendation is we set up a full and comprehensive review. The main objective of gaining comfort over the use of the grant money. So the question is, do we have that comfort yet? That's question number 1. Question number 2, it refers to a report in Punchline, I think yesterday. They seem to have seen the report that Marketing Gloucester got ahead of the decision we made to put it into insolvency. They say, the report adds, we have no accounting records, bank accounts, etc. in relation to the UK DRIC. As such, we have no idea what may be hidden under the rug in relation to this entity. They then refer to numerous contracts and financial obligations appear to have been created for this company, either the name of the DRIC or Marketing Gloucester. The question being then, how on earth do we get ourselves into a situation where we set up a company with £400,000 of public money and it's got no records? Is that even legal? That's question number 2. And question number 3, does anyone here know who approved this project in the LEP? Because they must have seen something to justify it, to sign it off, because this is public money we're talking about, which must be accounted for. And who on earth in the County Council would have signed that off? Because I think there's other wider questions to be answered. We may not know the answer to that question here tonight, but if somebody could look into it as a matter of urgency, I want to know who signed that off and what documentation did they see that justified it for them to sign it off, and who approved it in the County Council. Thank you.
Thank you. Jenny, do you want to have a...
Yeah, I'll do my best to answer some of the questions, but as I
that's
said at the beginning, and particularly with respect to the UK DRIC, there is still a lot more in which we need to establish, and there are a number of parties who are obviously interested in trying to understand what happened. What I can confirm with the UK DRIC is, and I take Councillor James's point about, the council was aware of the project, the public were aware of the project coming, and certainly there was a level of discussion at board level about the project and how best it could move forward. What there was not was any board decisions around any separate subsidiary companies being set up, and you would envisage that if there was, there would be board minutes obviously documenting why there'd be a decision to particularly appoint the chief exec of MGL and the bookkeeper as those directors. So it's certainly true to say we don't have any records around the formation of the subsidiary or the understanding of what the rationale was necessarily behind that particular choice. And therefore we also don't have any of the records for the company, if they even exist, in terms of understanding the full contractual liabilities that the UK DRIC. So hence the comment in the report which Punchline have received, and they have received that because they are a creditor of MGL, so they would have received it as part of that course. The liquidator at the moment will of course need to do some further investigations as to what happened. What we do know is the £400,000 that was received into MGL and used for, as it was intended, a capital project, which is the UK DRIC as a physical asset that you will see on the first floor of the shopping centre. That money was on the basis that it would obviously be levered in to attract other funds in order to complete the UK DRIC as a project in itself. The £400,000 was spent, however there was a £76,000 overspent on that, which was not something that the board was aware of until the accounts and the VAT process commenced a bit later in the year, by the time I was appointed as the chair. And of course that £76,000 became a debt to MGL as a company rather than to the UK DRIC, because we were in receipt of the money as a company at that time. So I think that probably hopefully answers your questions. Declan, remind me if there's anything further.
Well, it was regards to the LAP and the County Council. The Grant Thornton report said they couldn't find any documentation, detailing this project, but there must be something somewhere, because in the LAP itself, something must have arrived on top of somebody's desk detailing what this project is, a proposal, a proper documentation. I'm just wondering, has anyone seen it?
There are certainly email records of when the company was set up, and that will involve the County Council and the former chief exec and bookkeeper, and all of those records and all that information has been passed to the liquidator in order to review what's happened. And of course, because the UK DRIC has a separate board in a sense, which is the two directors we've mentioned, the liquidator will have to undertake almost a separate process to establish whether those directors have conducted themselves as they should as part of the process of setting up a company, running a company, and doing everything they're supposed to do. So we are still at very early days, and that is mainly to do with the fact that the information available to me as chair and to the board after I was appointed, it was very difficult to obtain. A lot of the information that has been obtained has been part of the investigation process into the former chief exec, parts of the conversation that we've obviously had with other parties trying to establish the facts. And I can certainly say that information is becoming available as we speak, but it is now the role of the liquidator to give that a full look.
Can I just add to that? I don't disagree with any of that. In terms of the application to the local enterprise partnership, anybody who's been involved with those at any point will know that you do have to provide a lot of information, and there was, I don't have a copy of it, but I recall there being a pretty substantial paperwork that formed the application. So the local enterprise partnership, I would hope, would still have that. In terms of their decision-making process, my recollection is that it was a decision of the LEP board to approve funding for the the UK DRIC. And punchline has been mentioned, and it may be mentioned again, that the Chief Executive of the LEP is quoted in there as saying that the grant was spent for the purpose it was intended. I think the only other two points I would make, and we may come back to that, is there was a separate advisory board for the UK DRIC, and I think that's where a lot of the detail was gone into, although I didn't sit on that. And in terms of the limited company, and I've made this point before, my understanding, and I think somebody can correct me if I'm not accurate in this, but the limited company subsidiary for the UK DRIC effectively was a dormant company. It had no assets and no liabilities. So although it was set up at the moment, probably with the intention that it would become an active company, I don't believe that it was.
Jenny, on that.
I can confirm there is an active UK DRIC subsidiary company that does have assets and liabilities and a bank account and a current status with Companies House.
Thank you. Just very briefly.
Just very briefly, would I be right in thinking that the recommendation from the Grant Fund to report that the Council commissions a full and comprehensive review of the UK DRIC, is that still going to go ahead now that we're in the company's in liquidation?
As it stands, no. We were obviously set to do so. We got as far as procuring at the time, but of course when more financial information became available by the company and went into liquidation, that kind of was put an end to that for now. But of course there is a conversation to be had around the future of the UK DRIC once the liquidator has had a look at it, and what we can do to ensure that that initial concept and what would be great for the city can carry on in some format.
Just one last, okay. Can we safely say, do we now have comfort over the use of that grant money?
I understand that the LEP have obviously confirmed that the £400,000 was spent accordingly. Of course, there is the issue of the overspend, but there, as far as I'm concerned, there are still further investigations to be had by the liquidator and other parties as to the breakdown of that £400,000 and whether it was spent appropriately.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Stevens waited very patiently, but just whilst we're on the subject of the DRIC, because I'm interested in, I'm a layperson in this perspective, so I don't really understand, get it, but I'm particularly interested. We've talked about this awareness of the DRIC, and I think we've established, correct me if I'm wrong, between the two of you tonight, that there was an awareness the DRIC was happening, there wasn't an awareness of an establishment of a separate subsidiary, yes. Am I correct? Or by close?
No, there was some awareness of it. There was a discussion that took place between the former chief exec and a couple of the board directors about the vehicle in which to deliver the UK DRIC, but there's a difference between advice and decision.
Okay, and that's the point I'm getting at, actually beating to it, because being a chair of scrutiny, I'm nothing if not a stickler for rules, and my understanding is in the membership agreement with MGL, it was that the City Council had to, as it were, sign off on any arrangements over £100,000. So there may have been an awareness and discussions, but I mean, you were both in Cabinet, Paul. I know you obviously recused yourself because you had a conflict of interest yet, but just very briefly, yes or no, were you aware that there was any council sign-off of this decision? Not just an awareness, not just knowing that there were discussions, but a formal decision?
There was no formal decision. One of the first sort of issues or items that was brought to my attention as the chair was around the fact that there hadn't been authorisation from the council about a project over the value of £100,000, and there was also discussion about whether the volume of that amount of money that went into MGL would change the status of the company from being a technical company to being a trading company, because once you receive more funds from elsewhere, different sources, it effectively changes the legal status of the company. And one of the things that I did discuss with council officers was trying to get a better understanding of what money had come in, how it had been spent, and how that affected the legal status of the company.
And also, just in terms of the future, because again I'm a layperson, so I don't know, you may not be able to answer this. Obviously, MGL was our company, we were the sole shareholder. That then established the DRIC. Is there a transitive relationship therefore between us as the City Council and the DRIC in the future? Are we responsible? Do we have any liabilities? Do you understand what I'm getting at?
The UK DRIC is an entirely limited company. It is only wholly owned by MGL, and MGL, of course, were wholly owned by the City Council. But as far as I'm concerned, and it will be for the liquidator to confirm, that there is no liability to the council for anything that's attributed to that company. It would be treated like any other private limited company.
Thank you. So, Councillor Stevens, thank you for your patience.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a number of questions. Do you want me to pursue them individually or en bloc?
Which would be easier to review individually?
Individually, fine.
Yeah.
I want to start with the whistleblowing report which took place in 2013 because I would like to understand the process by which the company was chosen to carry out that independent report. Because as I understand it, it was not only a company that had previously been employed by Marketing Gloucester Limited, so there is a contractual relationship there in the past, and you will correct me if I'm wrong, I wasn't on the council at that time. So what were the criteria for appointing the whistleblowing company? Who made the appointment? Why was an HR consultancy firm chosen, when, as I understand it, the major complaints were of governance and financial issues, and in those circumstances it would have been more appropriate to appoint a company that had expertise in those matters, such as an auditing company or a company of finance in government experts. So I'm questioning how truly independent was the whistleblowing report that was carried out in 2013. And I'd appreciate some thoughts from Paul as to what went wrong, because either the report that the whistleblowers carried out was totally inadequate given what subsequently came to light, or the interpretation that was put in the report by the Marketing Gloucester board was wrong. It can't be both ways, because we've learned subsequently there were a whole range of things that were going wrong. The whistleblowers were totally justified in what they'd said, so I just don't understand what went on with that whistleblower report.
I think there were more than one question in there. And you'll appreciate that it may not be easy to remember every detail 6 or 7 years on, but I'll do my best. So in terms of the decision, I believe it was a board decision to appoint the company to undertake the investigation. It is true that there have been some involvement with that company a number of years previously, where I believe they had written some HR policies and procedures for Marketing Gloucester, but the HR professional who undertook the investigation had never had any involvement with the company before, so I and the board were satisfied with her independence and her professionalism. In terms of why we chose an HR company, again, I'm trying to go from memory here, but I believe that the person that we used was experienced in undertaking these types of investigations. And it's not correct to say that it was all based around finance and governance. From my recollection, there were 30 or 40 different allegations and very wide-ranging allegations. So it seems a perfectly appropriate company to an individual to use. And then to answer Kevin, or I think it's Kevin's last question about what went wrong. Well, I'm not sure that in relation to that issue we can say anything went wrong. It was thoroughly investigated. It went to the board considered it, and accepted the outcome of the report. Whether there is any connection between what happened then and what has happened subsequently, to my mind, hasn't been proved.
Next question, David.
Yeah, I want to look at financial reporting at MGL. Firstly, when the reductions were made in council expenditure, I would have expected any half-competent board to have looked at the effect of that and to revise and draw up a new business plan. As I understand it, the business plan was never modified at Marketing Gloucester Limited as a result of reductions from the council. So I'm failing to understand why to that extent. And secondly, if I'm incorrect, you will no doubt correct me. As I understand it, there were no regular financial reports in terms of income and expenditure statements, cash flow statements being considered and going to the board. Now that is such a basic requirement of any board, and if that was not taking place, then sorry Paul, but you do have to take some blame for that. You were the chair of the company, you were the leader of the board, and basic financial reporting should have been going on, and you would have then been aware as a board, you would have been aware much earlier as to what the actual financial position was. While we're on the reduction in council spending, because you did make a very serious allegation, if, after you say there is evidence that officers against the will of the company ordered you to carry out certain actions, irrespective of having the ability to deliver those, can that please be provided to members of this Overview and Scrutiny Committee?
Paul.
Right, sorry, I'm just trying to remember all of the points here. In relation to the business plan, there was a 5-year business plan in place from 2016 to 2021. I think it's fair to say that wasn't revised, although the budgets were revised annually, and there was a lot of discussion within the board about the financial position. So I think to try and pretend that the board wasn't trying to address the financial position wasn't right. It's certainly trying to address the position in terms of bringing in new sources of income and reducing expenditure where it was possible to do so. There was regular reporting to the board of income and expenditure. I think where I accept the board could have been provided with better information was in relation to cash flow and balance sheets, but there was certainly financial information provided to every board meeting. And I think we were collectively as a board probably guilty of relying too much on the various levels of accountants that were involved, and probably understandably, but I think that's a reasonable point to make. And then in relation to the final point, as I said to you earlier, Chair, I've offered to make available all of the relevant emails. I made them available to the 2 sets of consultants who came in towards the end of last year, and I'm happy to do so again.
Thank you. Your next question, Kevin?
Yeah, I think it's already been answered, but just for the purpose of clarity, with regard to the UK DRIC, there's been various statements made about officers were aware. As I understand the service level agreement and your articles of association, the board were required to seek the permission of Gloucester City Council as the shareholding company before establishing the UK DRIC or any subsidiary company over a certain amount of money. So am I correct in that that permission was never sought by the board from the City Council? Then I've got 2 more just very brief questions.
And again, as a non-executive chairman, you only put a very limited amount of time into this. I'm sure members will understand that I'm not aware of every detail of every document, whether it's the funding and management agreement or the memorandum of articles of association, and you rely on the advice of others, both the chief executive of the company and officers within the council to support you in those roles. But my understanding from the advice I was given was that the company didn't need to seek advice from the council to create a subsidiary. It should have sought formal permission from the council to enter into the agreement because of the amount of match funding that was required to lever in the £400,000. And I accept that wasn't done in a formal sense, although, as I mentioned earlier, it was reported at this governance meeting on the 29th of September 2017.
Yes, you said you had 2 more, Kevin.
The 2 more short questions, and I think they're for both Jenny and Paul. In your views, what were the main things that went wrong, and what lessons can we learn going forward? And secondly, because I think we are going to have to look at this, and I would appreciate, given your experience, that we gained some of that information before you're no longer members of the council after May. Do you have any views on the roles of councillors on the boards? In particular, should we continue to put councillors on boards, or would we not be better off putting professional council officers on board, and if councillors are to remain on board representing this council, what is the mechanism by which they should be held accountable for that?
Can I go first? And it's a very good question, and perhaps one that needs some longer reflection before being able to answer it fully, and probably the completion of the inquiry that you're undertaking before we can come up with all of the answers and recommendations for the future. But in terms of what went wrong, I think in the future, clearly you can't have such a major reduction in funding without revising your expectations of the organisation who you're providing that funding to. And having gone back through emails and documents, as I've done since some of this has started to unfold, I think there are a number of points. The service level agreement should have been revised, and that didn't happen. There were proposals put forward by Marketing Gloucester to achieve the savings. Those weren't accepted, but the savings had to take place anyway. So I think there needed to be a much more active and collaborative approach to how those savings were going to be achieved. I'm sure there will be lots more lessons once we come to the end of this process. I think just picking up Kevin's points about councillors on the board, it's quite a difficult one, as was evidenced by the fact we had 2 reports in December. I think the Melanie Sensical one saying councillors shouldn't be on the board or shouldn't be chairing the board, and the Grant Thornton one say we should strengthen it and they definitely shouldn't be chairing it. So my personal view from my experience is that I don't think they should. It was never something I sought to take on. It was something I picked up when the previous chair resigned, and because of the financial position of the company going back as far as there wasn't anyone who wanted to take it on. That's a point I've made before. But I do think that being chairman of the board and leader of the council at the same time does put you in a very difficult position. It means you can't take part in those discussions around the funding decisions for the company. And I just think from my experience, it's not something that's desirable, and my suggestion was that we don't do the same thing in the future.
Thank you. Do you want to add anything, Jenny?
Yeah, I think in terms of what went wrong, you have had the paper circulated which gave some 3 key points in a sense of the areas and which really had an impact bringing us to where we are today. But again, just to say that it's subject to further review. But I think in terms of some of the commentary around grant fund reduction, I mean, absolutely, there's no way that we, as a council, when we withdraw funds from any organisation, does it not have an impact? Absolutely. And, we've been through a really difficult 10-year period in terms of having to reduce funding from various parties, whether that's the voluntary sector, Amy, Aspire. We've had high expectations of all of our partners to be able to achieve savings. So I do agree that will have caused an issue. But I guess from my point of view, in terms of entering a company, and Paul said, there wasn't a revised business plan. There wasn't a document that I could refer to as the new chair that talked about how those savings were going to be achieved. And as you'll have seen from the various pieces of information that have entered into the public domain in various formats, that you certainly wouldn't expect to see a company increasing costs, things like salaries and sundries and accountants' fees. And you'd be looking for savings in areas where you could. So there's certainly a lot of investigation required, I think, and more dialogue about that in the future. But I think it is true, as this statement says, to say that the company did fail in many ways to deal with that core reduction in funding. The timeline that you've sent, I think the difficulty was that information was not forthcoming, and whether that was information to the council or whether that was information to the board of directors. You'll see, for example, here in this commentary around, in September, August, September, about the council's request for up-to-date information about cash flow and about how information at that time was coming back incomplete. If I certainly cast my mind back to the point on the 13th of May where I sent out, as the acting as chair at that time of Cabinet, the decisions for the new arrangements, we had been presented with requests from Marketing Gloucester at that time of things that they obviously wanted us to look at, and there was no mention of cash flow in any of those documents. You know, in August we still weren't aware, and in good faith when I came to the local authority when we identified a cash flow problem and said this is the figure that we require in order to see us through to the end of the financial year, I was acting in good faith on the information that was being given to me as a board director at that time, that that figure would be suffice. But as we now know, it absolutely wasn't. And as you will also know, as a result of some of those issues, the former chief exec was subject to disciplinary proceedings. So I think, you know, there's a lot to be learned in terms of how the company was conducting itself. And, you know, and I take Paul's point about, you know, you're trying to look at other ways to diversify your income. Certainly some of the projects that would have been entered into would have been with the intention to try and lever in additional funding. But again, you know, lots of high-risk projects and lots of contractual liabilities, which now we know are obviously listed as creditors. In terms of the question about should councillors be on the board, it certainly has not been an easy time as a councillor getting involved. But I think we've got some good examples of where councillors make really important contributions to outside bodies and to companies. So I certainly wouldn't want to say absolutely no, but I think there is a lesson to be learned about ensuring that whoever is appointed to an outside body or has a role in a company is given the right support and training to be able to conduct that job. Not specifically reflecting on my position, because obviously I've you know, been fortunate to be able to gain lots of support in order to conduct myself, but you know, it certainly wouldn't have been for the faint-hearted, so it's not something we would normally generally expect, I would imagine, a councillor in a non-exec role to do. So I think, you know, there just needs to be a better understanding of what the role is, what somebody's taking on, and making sure that there is the training support, which may require a budget to do so. We know that we have some councillors have excellent skills in lots of areas that can be applied and transferred elsewhere, but I think, you know, that is something as a council we need to consider before we just appoint people to boards without any necessary particular knowledge in that area. Does that help?
Thank you, that's really helpful. I'm going to go to Councillor Walford, and then that was Councillor. Did you want to say something? Then I'm going to go to Councillor Love, she's not spoken, and then Councillor Hill's got 5 questions for Councillor Watkins, and I'm going to move to the next section of the meeting because we're running out of time. So, can I go to Councillor Walford first?
Okay, thank you, Chair. I've taken on board obviously a lot of information tonight, and there's a piece of the jigsaw that I need, and the question will be is what were relations like between Marketing Gloucester and council officers? A bit of background, because that, for me, can fill in that little bit of the jigsaw into the puzzle. I think it's probably a historical question, so it's more for Paul than Jenny, I would think, if he's able to answer it, Chair.
Men might not be when you're able to ask Paul, but...
Well, I think I would say that relations between Marketing Gloucester and council officers were variable. Clearly there was some, I think, you know, generally the team at Marketing Gloucester got on with everyone. I think the former chief executive didn't get on with everyone. I think there was certainly some great deal of tension between the former chief executive and the corporate director dealing with with Marketing Gloucester up until May. And you know, if you were in a room with both of them, it's clear that they didn't get on. And if you saw some of the email exchanges between them, that would underline that point. And one of the things that I suggested to the managing director when I stood down from the board was that there was a change between which corporate director looked after Marketing Gloucester, because I didn't think it was a very good relationship, and there was an allegation that the corporate director had been overheard describing Marketing Gloucester as the enemy. So I didn't think with that kind of relationship, that could continue.
I will add that there was certainly strain, and Paul has clearly indicated there was some changes in the arrangements of a number of parties involved in Marketing Gloucester when I was appointed as chair. So that was the corporate director, obviously myself as the chair, and there was certainly strained relationships, but it wasn't purely just with council officers. And if Councillor Lee Snokes had obviously been here this evening, she would certainly tell you that those strained relationships went beyond council officers and involved members of the council as well, and certainly lots of stakeholders and partner organisations who I've had conversations with. I think it's probably fair to say, that the former chief exec had some great relationships with some people, but that was very variable. I think it would be wrong to particularly highlight a particular instance and name one officer, when I think it's fair to say that relationships between Marketing Gloucester and the council had pretty much broken down. And council officers certainly expressed to me at the time it was very difficult to be able to have a conversation because of the conflict of interest in having the chair of Marketing Gloucester as also at one time the cabinet member and the leader, and that was certainly why a lot of those arrangements were put in place and I was appointed as chair.
Thank you. Jan.
As I was a substitute on this committee, I actually thought I'd better get some background information. And I went onto the Companies House website for an hour, and I could see the problems immediately. And I want to know who signed off the company accounts, the Company House, because every single auditor mentions that there's significant doubt about having a going concern, significant, and basically saying it's because Gloucester City Council is backing this. And that goes on from 2014, 2015, 2016, and then in March 2017, the auditor says significant doubt about going concern, but the council loan, there is no paperwork trail for backup from Gloucester City Council. And it's there. I said it took me an hour to see that there was a problem all the way through that. So who was signing off the information to Company House?
Yeah, this is quite a historic thing. So, going back to 2010, if you look at the company accounts, this is before I was chair, the company lost £165,000 in a single year. And that was the point at which the previous chair stood down and I took over. And some of that loss stayed on its balance sheet, so effectively it was in a position of having net liabilities. And that's why the reason no one else wanted to take it on, because you look at the balance sheet, you see there's a big net liability position, and you wouldn't want to take it on. And because of that, what the council was required to do, because that debt was converted to a loan from the council, and what the council had to do each year when the annual accounts were submitted to Companies House, and it would be the head of policy and resources as it is now, that would provide this, but is to provide a statement effectively to say that that loan won't be called in and the company can continue trading on that basis. So that statement was provided for the accounts each and every year.
Okay.
Just answer who was signing them off to the Company House, because anyone who was signing them off would have read the auditor's comments. Because I'm not good at seeking balance sheets, but I read every single auditor comment. The auditors were not happy all the way through from 2014 through to the present day, basically. They didn't seem to have picked that up either.
Well,
Marketing Gloucester or on the council side.
To be fair, I think that was the question that Councillor Wilson asked at full council a few meetings ago. But it's a fairly standard thing where you have a company in a net liability position that is effectively has the backing of its shareholder. That shareholder provides that sense of comfort about being a going concern. So that is something that the company was aware of and the council was aware of.
Final question from Councillor Hilton for this part of the meeting, please.
Yeah, I just wanted to pick up a point that Jenny made, and that was about the request for £240,000 loan to be drawn down, and that was made in good faith at the time. You remember that was around September time, and we were told in a briefing I received from officers that 240k should ensure that Marketing Gloucester survived to the end of the year. I was aware that the debts to the government were around £120,000, so I assumed they were telling me the truth, that the company would survive until the end of the financial year. But, so I was concerned, and that's why members of our group called in the Cabinet members' decision. And we questioned whether in actual fact we were just throwing £240,000 to save the company just for a few weeks. Our calling was not agreed by the scrutiny committee. It was discussed on the 14th of October. But the loan subsequently was fully drawn down, and I just wonder what changed in your mind, Jenny, between the 11th of September when we started this process to the 25th of February, when the company went into liquidation with debts of nearly £1 million. That's 4 times the sum of the loan that we provided in order to save Marketing Gloucester Limited. Were you aware, and was a Cabinet member aware, that around the time of the 14th of October, when we had to call in, in actual fact this £240,000 was not going to be enough to save the company? Or were you just transferring the money purely to pay off debts to the government and also to ensure that the staff got paid? Or was that the reason why we went ahead with it? Or did you actually think that the 240k was going to, the company was going to survive until the end of the financial year?
I can absolutely confirm that at the time when we approached the council for funds for 240k, that was the figure that I was being told would be sufficient to see us through until the end of the financial year, that would cover the debts and liabilities that we owed to our creditors, and that would suffice any salary payments and overheads that we would need to cover. And you will see from the timeline, all of which is well documented, and obviously all of the emails that sit behind that are available, that we went from a stage of being appointed to the local, I was appointed as chair, we became aware of a cash flow problem. Conversations and meetings were held between me and the board director, cabinet and council officers to discuss being able to access support to keep the company going. The figure, as you will see, information was requested over a period of time from the former chief exec and the bookkeeper, and all that information was presented and put forward, which backed up the request for 240k. It was obviously only further into the process in terms of trying to fully understand how the company was running and sort of what was happening in terms of practices within the organisation, did it become apparent that the information that the board was receiving and that I was receiving as chair was not factually correct. You'll see that a process commenced in terms of investigating that, in terms of the suspension of the chief executive officer, which led to a dismissal in December of both him and of the bookkeeper. And of course, in parallel, running alongside that, was the commissioned reviews that we'd already agreed to do as part of trying to give comfort and security to the local authority, first of all about how the company was running and obviously the financial governance and the situation there, but also to have an opportunity to discuss what the future of Marketing Gloucester would look like and how it may need to be funded and resourced differently into the future. So there was a lot going on over quite a short period of time. It wasn't until December, with the dismissal of the chief exec and the bookkeeper, did obviously information become available to us that had otherwise been withheld. And once we gained access to those company records and accounts and information, did it become apparent, obviously in the new year, that the company was in far more serious financial difficulty than we'd envisaged, and of course led to the conversation with the local authority about the accurate position of finances and what that meant. And of course, the moment that I was told, that there isn't more funds available was the moment that I had to make the decision legally as a company director, with responsibility for day-to-day running of that company, that I could no longer carry it forward with the directors. And the following day, we took the company into insolvency. But may I say, I may be and have been, up until a point, the chair of Marketing Gloucester, that I am an elected councillor of this council who has responsibility as a guardian to the public purse. So every decision in which I have taken for Marketing Gloucester has had that in mind. You know, this is taxpayers' money that we are talking about, and money that I would have hoped, you know, would have been well spent. And I'm not denying that Marketing Gloucester has made, you know, significant impact in many ways to this city positively. But unfortunately, you know, the way the company in which it had been run and the difficulties that it found itself in has led us to where we are today, and it does mean that that investment of the £240,000 and the £97,000, you know, I can't predetermine the outcome of the liquidation process, but it's possible that it won't come back to the local authority, and that does sadden me.
Can I just come back to Jenny? I mean,
very briefly, please.
Just very briefly. You took over the company middle of last year. Did you expect to be taking over a company that the current leader of the council described as probably one of the worst run companies he's ever seen? Did you expect it to be so bad when you took over the job of chairing Marketing Gloucester Limited?
I think that's a no.
Of course, I didn't expect to take on the company. I'm not going to answer that question. I mean, I think it's fair to say that nobody was expecting to be in this position. I'm sure that everybody involved is saddened that we're in this position. But I just want to assure you that we have worked together collectively as board of directors and as council officers and partners and everybody involved to get us to this point, which, although unfortunately the company is in liquidation, you know, we have taken every step that we can to try and protect the creditors and to protect the staff and to, you know, make sure that the reputation of Gloucester and all the good work that has been done by Marketing Gloucester is not lost. So no, did not expect, and as I say, I'm sure Councillor James did not expect it either, and unfortunately there are parties that have been involved in events leading up to this which aren't here this evening, but of course do have a lot of questions in which they should be answering.
Yeah, I was just going to make the same point that you know, the people that can answer the questions about those figures are the former chief executive and the bookkeeper, and potentially the board member who had responsibility for finance, and you know, I hope they will have an opportunity to answer those questions at some point. The other point I was just going to make is that I am disappointed that Grant Thornton didn't flag up any concerns along these lines. When we were talking about discussing the brief for the Grant Thornton exercise back in September, one of the points I made, and just looking at the email now, on what that brief should include, I did say we need to get to the bottom of the cash flow and P&L position. I don't want us to deal with the cash flow now, only to find us in a similar position later because of future commitments against current income. So it was flagged up by me. I don't believe that actually made it into the brief, but I am disappointed that for all the money we paid Grant Thornton, they didn't flag this up as a potential problem, you know, so recently.
Councillor Watkins, Councillor James, thank you for that this evening. I know it seems like a repetitive process, but it has been useful, and I think we have learned things this evening that both of you weren't previously aware of. So thank you for coming in. Jenny, I know I said this to you 2 meetings ago, but I promise this will be both of your last appearances before Owen Street, so thank you for all the past 4 years. Yeah, sure. Can I invite our next attendees to the table, please? Welcome everyone, thank you all to you for coming as well. There's a lot of information tonight. We are operating under a guillotine, so I would ask that questions and answers alike are succinct, and we want to get to questions as soon as possible. But I would offer any of you sat at the table, if any of you did want to make any brief opening remarks, the opportunity to do so now if you want to indicate to me that. Councillor Morgan.
Thank you, Chair. Clearly, the questions that you wish to put to us are the most important part of your deliberations tonight. I would just like to flag up initially that I hope you will agree, I hope the committee will agree, that since particularly myself took over the role of cabinet member and found myself in what has been obviously indicated a very difficult position, I have done my absolute best to be transparent and clear with the committee and with all the dealings that we've had. I believe that to be true for the officers and all involved in this very difficult process. Just briefly, Councillor Watkins has just alluded to the fact that what has happened in the last few months has been aimed at trying to salvage a very difficult situation, and in particular to try and put in place what protection we could for the staff, those still working at Marketing Gloucester, who through no fault of their own found themselves in this very unfortunate situation just before Christmas. So we did, myself and the officers, everyone involved has done their best to sort of try and ease that for the staff at MGL. I do thank them publicly for carrying on working and doing their jobs when it was very difficult and they were under that cloud. And I'm glad to say that some positives are coming out. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Does anyone else want to say anything before we move to questions? In which case we will jump straight to the Councillor Stevens, and then I have Councillor Patel and Councillor Johnson.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I've got a number of points. I'll just update you on more into one. Can I start in response to Councillor Morgan by saying that I feel well, and I think most of the people on this scrutiny committee do not question that Marketing Gloucester did do some valuable work, despite the failures and the faults, and that none of the things that have happened are in any way laid at the door of the staff who all the time have been very hard working and have done a job to the best of their ability on behalf of the city. But something did go wrong, and I think that so far this evening we've concentrated on what went wrong at MGL and the board. What we now need to get to is what went wrong with the council and our oversight and management of that company. So the kind of questions that I've got is, in hindsight, looking at the original service level agreement and the lack of a performance management framework, do you think that we had a sufficient mechanism in place for the oversight of that company? Second question again is a direct correlation to that. Did you as officers think you exercised sufficient monitoring and oversight, or could you have picked this up earlier and should not the alarm bells have been ringing earlier and things reported to members? Because this has been raised since 2013 by members, largely of the opposition parties, at various committees, audit and governance, overview and scrutiny. And largely we were told, no, everything is fine. There was a very serious allegation made by Councillor James that officers effectively arm-twisted and forced the company to undertake work when the company was advising them that it did not have the resources to do so and it was going to create financial difficulties. Do the officers agree that they did effectively do that, or again have we got a difference of opinion between the officers and the chair and the board of MGL? And I've asked again for the evidence to support the allegations that Councillor James made. In terms of the whistleblower report, because it was asked by a member of the public, again, it seems very strange to me that we did not keep a copy of that report when we did at one stage clearly have it in our possession and it somehow has been lost. Can you reiterate why we feel it was not necessary to keep a copy of the whistleblower report? And again, I'm certainly aware of some of the allegations that are surrounding Gloucestershire Airport at the moment. Do we need to be revising our whistleblowing policies and procedures in light of that, so that where trust or companies that we have a financial relationship with, that we control or have a contractual relationship with, we have a responsibility for those whistleblowers and not just the companies? My other question, and I'm not sure how you can answer this because it's mainly, I think, addressed to the Cabinet. When the Cabinet is looking at setting its budget and making 100,000 a year reductions to Marketing Gloucester, the question arises, what advice was given to the Cabinet by the professional officers? Because we have heard from Councillor James that he was telling on a regular basis the officers that the company could not afford to bear those cuts without a significant reduction in the level of expectations from this City Council. So when Cabinet members were taking those decisions, what advice were you, as professional officers, given to Cabinet? Did you effectively say to them, it's perfectly acceptable for Marketing Gloucester to make these reductions and there will be no adverse effect on the company? Because that to me seems to be a very important consideration. Again, my final question is directly to Jonathan Lund. Did you describe MGL as the enemy, as again has been accused tonight? Because there does seem to have been a very, very serious breakdown in relationships between this arm's length company and the directors of the company. Thank you, Chair.
Now, obviously one of those questions was directly to one person, but I don't want you all to comment on each of those questions, so I think it's best if we decide who's most appropriate. So we've got the issue around the service level agreement and the performance management framework. The best person for that is Jonathan. The issue about whether as a tech will be instructed MGL to do events they can't afford, that question is probably Jonathan. The issue around the whistleblowing report and whistleblowing procedures going forward, that would be for John. Who gave what advice to Cabinet? That's a question for Jonathan, and then the final question also for Jonathan. So, should we do John's first about whistleblowing? Then we can just stick with Jonathan. Sorry. John.
Thank you, Chair. I was hoping you would go to Jonathan first.
Sorry.
In time to get the document, but I'll try and work from memory. Basically, the information that we provided to the whistleblower, I will try and repeat as best I can. There was a copy of the report given to my predecessor as head of paid service. The whistleblowing allegations, I understand, that came into the council, and my predecessor directed it to the board of MGL, there was, as Councillor James I think has described, a process then put in place by the board of MGL to conduct an investigation into the whistleblowing allegation. A copy of the report was sent to my predecessor, so there definitely was a copy at one point held by one council officer. That report, and certainly any of his documents or anything held in his mailbox, for instance, are no longer kept by the council. We have done a thorough search of all the council files and records and mailboxes, and we cannot find a single copy of that report. So, because it was an accusation by an employee of MGL against the management of MGL, there is no reason under the council's whistleblowing policy why the council should retain a copy of that report. I presume the reason why a copy of that report was sent to my predecessor, and here I'm just surmising because that person is no longer here, is because he wanted to assure himself that the board of MGL had conducted a whistleblowing allegation, and once he had received a copy of that report, he could effectively sign it off as having understood that the allegation had been looked into by the company under its procedures and had been closed. So he could effectively close down that line of investigation. So from my perspective, and having checked this with legal colleagues, they were of the same view, there is no reason under the council's whistleblowing procedure why the council should have retained a copy of that report. And as I said, to the whistleblower, we've searched and searched and we can find no copy of that report.
Questions, do you think that that is something that we should review in terms of future whistleblowing reports for companies such as MGL, which are armed for this council, or we have controlling interest over?
I think I'd be willing to consider reviewing that policy for tackle companies, but I don't believe we should review it for all of our companies. So, for instance, I would not expect to have a copy of every whistleblowing complaint laid against the management of Aspire if there had been any. That's a culture trust, an independent body set up. It has its own whistleblowing procedures, and I see no reason why the council should be micromanaging, for want of a better word, those procedures. There may be a different case. I need to give that some more thought as to whether a council that was 100% owned by a company that was 100% owned by the council, whether the council should retain that. But if you want to include that as part of your recommendations for further investigation, committee, then I'm very happy to look into it.
Thank you, John. Jonathan, do you want to try and address the...
Yes, so I think if I can, the first question was about whether there were sufficient mechanisms in place. And if I can just separate those two and talk first about mechanisms. Because the audit report from 2016 said that the governing documents between the council and Marketing Gloucester needed to be reviewed. And we did that, and they were put in place in March 2017. And we had, as a result of that, a revised set of memorandums and articles of association. We had a members' agreement which placed very specific requirements on Marketing Gloucester Limited to produce an annual business plan that set out its capital programme, that set out its budget, that gave a monthly cash flow, and that had a management report which provided a narrative about what Marketing Gloucester would be doing for the council over the year ahead, and a 5-year strategy as to how that 1 year would fit into a longer project. The contract for services said that there were 2 programmes for Marketing Gloucester to deliver. One was a programme of city events, so those are the festivals and events that we would be familiar with, and one was a set of civic events, so the activities that Marketing Gloucester did to support the civic party through their civic year. And those were to be agreed on an annual basis between Marketing Gloucester and the council. And then there were a set of other core functions around business support, around inward investment, around the visitor economy. And Marketing Gloucester were required to report performance against those as well. So all of that was set out in the revised documents that were agreed and signed by Marketing Gloucester in March 2017. And that is what led the subsequent audit report to say that those recommendations about tightening the governing arrangements with Marketing Gloucester were now in place. And there was also a recommendation that we review and regularise the arrangements with 2 very long-standing secondments. And that was part of the recommendation as well. So in terms of the mechanism for reviewing and managing the performance of Marketing Gloucester, I think those were in place. I think I have to say, in hindsight and in light of what we know now, that those were not sufficient to flag up the situation that we now find ourselves in. And I think there are a number of reasons for that. The premise of the arrangement was that the objects, and Grant Thornton criticised this, but the approach was that the objects and the scope of the work that Marketing Gloucester could do for the City Council were very widely drawn, so that we wouldn't get into a situation where if the council wished to commission Marketing Gloucester to do a piece of work, we stumbled into the fact that the objects were not wide enough to allow that. So the objects were widely drawn, but the intention was that there would be an annual business plan which would say, this is what we are going to do for the City Council over the next 12 months, with a 5-year plan for and how that would sit within a 5-year strategy. And the Councillor Lisa Noakes made, many attempts to get Marketing Gloucester to focus on producing that annual business plan, so that challenges and financial challenges and things like that could be addressed in the plan that was prepared by Marketing Gloucester and then submitted to and agreed by the council about what Marketing Gloucester would do for the council in return for the money given to it by the council in any given year. In August 2016, once the audit report had been put in place, we talked at a review meeting about the business plan, and the minutes say discussion focused on the need to address the clarity and transparency of the relationship between the council and Marketing Gloucester and consider how to manage a programme of savings arising from reductions in the MGL contract payment. So that was the mechanism, and I have to say that after 2 years of trying, I failed to get a working, acceptable, realistic, pragmatic business plan out of Marketing Gloucester. So I think my honest answer to your question, Councillor, is the mechanisms were there, but they proved ultimately not to be sufficient to flag up the problem that we had. In terms of the Teckle company and whether we instructed Marketing Gloucester to do something that it didn't have the money to do. As I've said, the contract for services said there would be an annually agreed programme of events. And what happened, the process was that Marketing Gloucester would produce a report in draft form which said, this is what we did last year, and this is our evaluation of those events, and this is what we would like to do for the year ahead. And that came from Marketing Gloucester. The cabinet member would have a look at that and sign it off or challenge it or prod and poke it and see whether there were any changes to be made. And then that would go forward as a report to the cabinet for the festivals and events programme to be agreed. In 2018, that programme, proposed by Marketing Gloucester and then put forward to the cabinet, included King's Jam, which had been identified in an independent review of the city's festivals and events as a festival with the potential for growth. So the report said we will deliver King's Jam in 2018 because it was an important potential growth festival for the city. In March 18, the chief executive came to one of the performance review meetings and said, we cannot fund that event, we don't have the money to fund it. And the response he got from the cabinet member and from officers was that that is an important growth event for the city, and that within the whole programme, that is not one of the events to cut. So he was given, the MGL were given a clear steer from the council at the performance review meeting in March 2018, and then that was subsequently followed up by a memo to the chief executive from the head of culture saying, we instruct you as part of the programme that was agreed by cabinet to deliver King's Jam in 2018. That wasn't an unfunded sum, it wasn't an additional sum, it was in the programme, and we told Marketing Gloucester that they had to prioritise its delivery.
Do we know what the cost of that event was?
We were subsequently sent an additional invoice for £18,000, which we refused to pay because we said it was part of the programme that was funded by the £160,000. The following year, 2019, Marketing Gloucester offered to do King's Jam for £24,000, 24.5 I think. But the organisers, the people who actually deliver King's Jam, which is the Music Works, said actually, if you give us 16.5, we can use that as match funding to Arts Council. And so we gave it direct, we gave 16.5 directly to the organisers, and they managed to secure, I think 35,000, it could have been 55,000, I need to go and remind myself. So it's that sort of ballpark funds. Certainly not the sort of amount that would have led to the sort of deficits at Marketing Gloucester that suddenly come to pass. And then finally, can I just say, I am personally very disappointed that a hearsay statement, completely uncorroborated, has been tabled in a public forum about what I have said about Marketing Gloucester. I have tried consistently, and I think successfully, to keep my relationship with Marketing Gloucester on a professional basis. I have never said that Marketing Gloucester were the enemy. It is not something that I would say. And I deny saying it, have the opportunity to say it in this public forum. I think that was the question. Yeah. Thank you.
I'm going to move now to Councillor Patel, please.
Thank you, Chair. Some of the questions I was going to ask have already been asked by Councillor Stevens, but I just wanted to touch on a few points. Number one, in Appendix 1A, or actually Section 3, questions, which asks, when did senior officers first become aware that MGL was experiencing financial difficulties? And then the answer in Appendix A doesn't actually give a specific date. So what my question is can the senior officers confirm exactly when they became aware that Marketing Gloucester were experiencing financial difficulties? Because the timeline that we provided only starts from the 13th of March. So that was the first question. And also within the response to 3A, states in the paragraph, something Councillor James touched on earlier, comparing the MGL with Aspire Leisure Trust. I think to try and compare Aspire with Marketing Gloucester, it's like comparing chalk and cheese. You know, there's a world of difference between what the service they provide, how they generate income, etc., etc. Surely there can be other examples that we can highlight or use, but to bring that one as an example, I think is quite unfair actually. Just can't compare the two. So that was the first question. Appendix 1A, sorry, question C. Appendix 1C. Question: what was the relationship between the council and Marketing Gloucester like in terms of access to financial information? And the response was that the council was provided with a copy of the annual accounts and annual budget. Something Councillor Ludd highlighted earlier, by spending an hour looking on Companies House website, she managed to obtain the financial details which showed that auditors were concerned from back in 2014. So I can't understand why corporate directors were unable to spot these issues on these concerns and perhaps produce a report to Cabinet from 2014, 2015 onwards. Why did it take until 2019 for us to get into this position when perhaps we could have picked up on that a lot sooner? And then to see. Officer's response again, Appendix 2C. Where's 2C? It states the response about the police have informed the council that there is no active police investigation underway, and the City Council is not aware that Marketing Gloucester has operated illegally at any point. So my question there is, who contacted the police to look into or investigate this matter? Was it the council, or was it the Marketing Gloucester board, or was it someone else? And I think Councillor Stevens already touched on the point about the service level agreement. Why was that not revised when we were reducing the funding for Marketing Gloucester? I mean, I'm aware of emails going back as far as 2017 where the Chief Exec of Marketing Gloucester raised concerns to senior managers regarding financial situation, financial position, and the risk to effectively pulling some major events. So my question again is, when did the senior managers first become aware of the financial difficulties of Marketing Gloucester? Because it doesn't provide any specific dates. With regard to the timeline from 13th of March 2019, we've given some very specific dates. When we're talking about responses from the officers, it's quite vague in some respects. So we'd be grateful for some clarity on that as well. And my final question is, again, Councillor James alluded to this, and my question perhaps maybe to the Chair perhaps is, why would we not consider sending an invite out to other members of Marketing Gloucester, whether it be the former Chief Exec, or whether it be a bookkeeper, or perhaps other board members?
I'll take my question first. The witness list was put together on the basis of the advice I sought and received from officers. I did consult what Pride has tried to consult as widely as possible with colleagues about who they wanted here, and if a member wanted those people to come, they had an opportunity to alert me to that. No one did. I think I can also probably answer the question about the police, because about the fact that there's no active police investigation, because this committee instructed me to seek legal advice before proceeding with this meeting as to whether it would conflict with any active police investigation. I then went to officers. I then went to one legal who advised me it would be best to contact the police directly, which I believe officers did, unless I'm wrong on that. And we were instructed, because we had a conversation about it, didn't we? And we were not, and as far as I'm aware, there was no active police investigation. John, do you want to touch on that?
The reference in this offer of officer response does refer to reply received by Democratic Services Manager,
yes,
who was following up in the light of your
yes,
request as to whether or not there was a police investigation. Whether or not, I think you were asking a pre-question, which is who actually first contacted the police to ask them if they were going to take action, and that's not a piece of action that I'm aware that was instigated by the council.
Thank you very much. Yeah, just to come back on your point, with regard to who is invited to the to this meeting, it shouldn't be necessarily for the board to for the members to be coming to you to say we should invite so and so, we should invite this person or that person. If we want to try and get to the bottom of this and get the best information we can, then that should be a step we should be taking regardless.
As I don't think that's quite what I said. As I said, I sought advice from officers about who would be best to invite in light of other events that are going on, because this is a fast-evolving situation. And like I said, I submitted this list of witnesses to colleagues and asked if they were happy with, if colleagues were happy with that, and I received no response to the contrary, so I proceeded on that basis. In your other points, I don't know who's probably best to answer them. Jonathan, do you want to have a go?
So, can I suggest that Anne Brinkoff answers the first question about when did officers first become aware of financial difficulties? I think, just so that he doesn't miss out on the fun, that Steve Brown is invited to answer the question about whether the Aspire comparison is fair.
Sure thing.
John Topping turned up at the office this morning wishing to attend this meeting but with exhibiting extreme flu-like symptoms, so I sent him home immediately.
Yes.
So I will attempt to answer your question about did we look at the company's house details. The question about why was the SLA not revised in the light of financial challenge, I think Jonathan Dunn has already answered that, but I will ask him to answer that again. And I would just like to say, Chair, it's not normal practice for officers to decide which witnesses to call. So without wishing to quibble with your answer, I don't think it was officers' advice to not invite two people that have been suggested should have been invited.
That's quite what I said.
Okay.
I think I said that I was uncertain who would be most appropriate, and did the thing I would always do as chair, which was to seek advice from not only from colleagues but from officers. Okay, and I based my decision on that advice. Officers did not decide. Let me make that quite clear. You are correct in what you said.
Yeah, just to clarify, I wasn't referring to just two individuals. I was referring to anyone who could be, suitable to come along and provide any more information to us, whether the other board members.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know that there was some correspondence between the chair and Councillor James, but just to put on record my understanding, I was sent the scoping document for this meeting with some suggested names from Councillor Cool. I wasn't aware that I was being asked to comment on the suggested list of witnesses when I was sent that. I did see that he asked his vice chair.
Yeah, that's what I'm referring to.
On the witness list. So should we? If you're happy with that running order, should we run through the answers in that order?
Chair, so it's really important. I'm confused about the status of the police investigation. Does the comment that there is no ongoing police investigation mean that the matter was referred to the police and they have decided that there is no case to answer, or has it not been referred to the police and they're simply not undertaking anything to be?
Can you begin the answering of the other questions, and I'll have a look at the email that the Democratic Services Manager received, see if I can answer that.
You say you know the answer to that?
I do know the answer to that. So if you're happy for me to
Okay.
respond from here.
Yeah.
So I can confirm, and I think maybe in your timeline, if it's not, then I can get the dates. But I approached the constabulary on behalf of the board with the board's consent, and after seeking external advice about the information that I had identified within the company concerning financial irregularities. I met with the constabulary on 2 occasions and shared, in order to be transparent with them, the things in which I'd established. There is not an active investigation into that information that I presented at this time, and the comments from the constabulary were around being able to differentiate between what is criminal and what is just a very badly run company. However, there is further information being collected from other parties involved with the finances of Marketing Gloucester, and at the time that they're available, they will be shared with the constabulary and they will review whether or not that changes the position.
Thank you. Are we happy with that?
Yeah.
Okay. Are you happy with the rest of the running suggestions? Should we run through that then? Who wants to go first?
Yeah, okay. I think the first response would be the question of what constituted financial concerns. So we've heard from Councillor James about the loan of £97,000, which we knew about, you know, which I guess wasn't a material challenge for the company. The first time we became aware of the cash flow issues was at the first performance monitoring meeting on the 16th of July, where we did get, you know, better financial information. So we had a cash flow statement and a profit and loss account. And the minutes of that meeting show in action for Jason Smith and the chair of the MGL and the head of policy and resources to have a conversation about, you know, the cumulative cash flow issue, which was at that point identified as about £180,000. And I guess events from then, you know, there were a number of sort of, you know, rapid conversations, emails, meetings, which identified the true, you know, cash flow, or at that point called, you know, cash flow deficit. So we had then the meeting on the 8th of August, which was initially to discuss the write-off of the historic debt, and that then prompted for us to ask, you know, a number of questions about finance, governance, and operation. And following from that, but with quite a lot of questions and nudging from officers, we you know, got better and better, you know, financial information, and the size of the cash flow issue did change on an ongoing basis. What I think is interesting is that on a note from MGL to the council, to council officers, on the 29th of August, which was prepared by Marketing Gloucester, you know, with a proposal for a number of projects MGL suggested to improve or ameliorate the balance sheet and cash flow requirements. It does say very clearly, and I quote, you know, during the last 3 financial years, MGL have been highly successful in leveraging additional funding to allow the activities it has been tasked to do so by Gloucester City Council to take place. In total, over the last 3 years, nearly 1.5 million of external funding has been raised by the company to enable it to continue delivering an ambitious programme of events, promote the city to tourists and investors, and deliver the UK DRIC. In the same period, there has been a significant reduction in City Council funding amounting to over £500,000, reduced combined with the instruction to deliver a number of events on behalf of the City Council, which placed significant pressure on the company. Remarkably, although this led to losses during the previous 2 trading years, the prospects for 2019 and 20 shows that on a P&L basis, the company will be approaching a break-even position. Although the company and directors have operated prudently and through intelligent cash management have managed to trade through this difficult period, the cumulative effects of deficit in the previous years, and especially the 2018-19 fiscal year, has been to leave an operational shortfall and subsequent cash requirement of £192,000. So, this very positive note led us to believe that actually, it was just a short-term, cash flow requirement rather than any substantive issues.
The next question was about...
So the next question, Chair, was about whether the Aspire comparison was
Yes,
fair. And I think rather than answer that direct question, maybe Steve Brown might want to give some experience about whether or not other DMOs around the country that he'd had experience of had experienced similar reductions, and if so, how did they deal with those?
Yes, I'm conscious that most people don't know me, so I'm Steve Brown, the interim chief executive of what was Marketing Gloucester, very interim as it turns out. And just really to say that my main experience was with a very similar company called Make It York up in Yorkshire. We were a DMO for the city. I ran it for 4 years. We set it up from scratch, and over the 4 years, the initial council funding for Make It York was reduced by 50%. So reduced by more than £450,000 over that period of time. It's a bigger DMO, so the figures are much different. But I think it is just to make the point really that there's probably not a DMO in the land that hasn't had to cope with a reduction in public subsidy over the last few years. And the challenge for people running DMOs has been to sort of take that on the chin and to either reduce costs or increase revenue, but ultimately to make sure the company's run as a going concern. Which is certainly the tack we took in York. So nothing unusual, and time frames are very similar to what we coped with further up north.
Thank you. Sorry, before we continue, we're just about to reach our procedural guillotine, and I've got members waiting to speak, and we need to consider recommendations. So I'm going to suggest an extension of an hour, and we don't need to use it all if we don't need to. So we all agreed on that, is there any consent? That's either an offer, not a challenge. So, but if that's agreed, we'll continue. So the next question you were going to try and take, John, in the absence of John Topping.
I will try, and it partly picks up Councillor Love's question earlier about the company's house information. So first of all, just to clarify where the responsibility lies, my understanding that the rules are that the board of MGL is responsible for signing off the accounts, not the council. So the council was not required to submit information to Companies House. What the council did do was the auditors, my recollection, and again I'm going from memory, but my recollection was the auditors would write year after year to the council saying there is this outstanding debt. Do you have any intention of calling this in? Because if you do, this means that the company would struggle to be a going concern. Each year, as far as I'm aware, we sought the political will of the administration, which was that they had no intention for that year of calling in that debt, and didn't wish to put Marketing Gloucester into that position. So we were therefore very willing to respond to the auditors to say that we had no intention of calling in that debt for the forthcoming year, and therefore if they wish to take that as an indication that they can describe the company as a going concern, they are free to do so. I do remember, in answer to your specific question, Councillor Patel, I remember Andrew Cummings looking at Companies House records every year before he went to councillors to seek their political will. So we did look at the Companies House records. The stuff that you two have both looked at is the stuff that officers also looked at. So all I can say is the only question that the council was asked to confirm each year was whether or not it was intended to call in the loan, because if so, that would have affected MGL's ability to trade as an ongoing concern. And each time the political will was no, they did not intend to call that in for that particular year. Obviously, they didn't want to particularly write off the debt, although there was a discussion about whether or not the council should write off the debt, which is mentioned in the timeline, but that was not the position, certainly in the first few years that I've been in post. It was more a question of do you wish to make a comment before the auditors reach their opinion on MGL's accounts. So hopefully that answers both of your questions. I think the other question, the final question was Jonathan Lund about why was the SLA not revised?
Yes.
Yes, I don't particularly want to repeat what I said earlier, but the mechanisms were there for that to happen. The expectation was that Marketing Gloucester, in accordance with the governance arrangements, would produce an annual business plan which says this is what we propose to do for the sum of money that we receive from Gloucester City Council each year. In August 16, after the audit report had been received, I asked Marketing Gloucester to revise the business plan to reflect the requirement for them to make changes from the year ahead. They didn't do that. There are other notes in the performance minutes where I again say to them, and it was at the same meeting at which the King's Jam challenge was raised, develop a 3-year strategic plan and a 1-year business plan which sets out what Marketing Gloucester will do. And Marketing Gloucester, the Chief Executive, repeatedly responded to those requests from me by saying, we already have a 5-year business plan, and that is all we are going to produce. And that is what Grant Thornton subsequently said was not an adequate business plan for an organisation facing the challenges that Marketing Gloucester faced. And can I also just add one other comment, which I think Councillor Stevens raised, which I should have answered and didn't, which was around the question of the advice that was given to the Cabinet by officers in relation to the savings that were required from MGL. Now, the original savings targets predated my time at the authority. So when I joined the council, there was already a savings plan with an aspiration that I think had been tested already by Cabinet to say that there was an aspiration to save £200,000 from Marketing Gloucester over a 2-year period. When I came in, we started that process of making very clear to Marketing Gloucester that was the council's expectation, start to plan and prepare for it. We got some proposals from Marketing Gloucester as to how they might do that. It didn't quite get to £200,000, and we briefed Cabinet at a Cabinet briefing, I think in December 2016, to say, here are Marketing Gloucester's proposals. Are you comfortable with them or not? Some they were comfortable with, some they were not. Cabinet chose to continue with the wish to include £200,000 over the course of 2 years in the savings target. So that was the steer that officers got, and that was the steer we then went on to try and deliver.
Thank you.
Can I just make a clarification?
Yes.
To deal with what John said. I knew that Marketing Gloucester would have to sign off those accounts. My question was who within Marketing Gloucester signed off those accounts, because one of the bizarre things about Companies House, it doesn't say who signed off the accounts. It mentions the auditors by name, but it doesn't mention who signs the thing off. I was just intrigued as to who knew what, basically.
You would know.
No.
Councillor Hilton, please.
Thank you, Chair. I've got 3 questions to 3 individuals. So Anne Stevens Speed, and your first up. Can I first of all thank you for the briefing that you provided me on the 18th of September last year, when you advised me about the state of Marketing Gloucester, limited in the fact that the council was looking to provide a loan facility, which we know is about £240,000 for drawdown facilities to save the company from going into liquidation. At the time I asked you whether you had copies of the year 18 and year 17 financial returns, the annual accounts. All we were able to get hold of was the abbreviated accounts. These are the accounts that are required by law to be sent to Companies House, but really don't provide any information that's useful to the shareholder wanting to make sure that the company directors are managing the company correctly. And when we got to the calling, we again, John Topping, I think, repeatedly said that he could not get hold of the full set of accounts. I think they just last year they are available. Maybe it's because of the situation. But don't you think that in future, this council, if it sets up a company that it has some shareholding, but certainly one that's got 100% shareholding in, that it ought to be require the storage of a full set of management accounts, which the officers of acting on behalf of the shareholders can consider and look at to make sure things are being done. But the full set of accounts should be provided, so that the shareholders can consider them and not just the abbreviated accounts, which they might go to claw off the company's house website. And also that we ought to be requiring an annual business plan, and if we don't get the annual business plan, we really need to be taking serious action. I wonder whether you think that there's things we can do to improve that situation. Because, you know, I found it very frustrating as a councillor to sometimes be told, well, you can't ask that question. Why is that for? Because you're not on the board. It's a private company. Hang on a minute. I'm representing the shareholders. And you know, if I think the board's not doing the job properly, I want to be able to see the accounts and check them myself. We've not been able to do that. So I just wonder whether you think that we ought to be looking at our procedures to make sure that any other company that we have shareholding in, that we actually do have this information available so that we can check on the financial health of the company at any particular time if we're concerned.
Okay. Thank you. I guess there is a fine balance between providing assurance as the shareholder members and letting a company be independent and deal with its matters independently. However, we asked for a number of, so the members' agreements required MGL to provide not only the business plan, but also a cash flow statement, a monthly projected P&L account, a balance sheet forecast, a 5-year medium-term financial strategy projection, and a management report. So I think that, again, the processes were there. I guess the next question is, and I think that's where the learning is, to make sure that that information is provided, that it's properly scrutinised and reviewed, and that's of good quality. Of course, it's I think the learning from all of this is very much around, making sure we've got the right business plans in place and we're reviewing it, and that we've got annual business plans and that information. But I think it's also about, building strong relationships so you get the information you need, and that's forthcoming, because with all the best will in the world, you've got the requirements. If that information isn't forthcoming in the way that you need it, it's very difficult. So I think there's a lot about learning about building really good relationships with the management of external companies.
Thank you. My second question is to Steve Morgan. And first of all, can I thank you for your assurance that you gave to the Scrutiny Committee that Grant Thornton report would be published in the public domain. Virtually all of it was, except for a minor bit of redaction, which didn't hide any of the difficulties that the company was facing, and I thank you on that. But also, you remember when we discussed the call-in, the members agreed to dismiss the call-in, and you went ahead and then confirmed your decision to award a £240,000 loan facility to Marketing Gloucester Limited. And I'll ask you the same question I asked Jenny. At that particular point in time, when you finally signed it off after we had our committee meeting, did you believe that there was any risk that the company would be bankrupt within just a few weeks? Or did you think that we provided a facility that would ensure that Marketing Gloucester survived certainly for the financial year and in good time for us to make decisions about the annual council budget and any financial support we might have wanted to give the company in the future?
Thank you. I'm quite happy to give categoric assurance that when that decision was made for the rolling known 240,000, that was based upon everything we knew at that point in time deemed to be sufficient. And I remember asking the question, are we sure this is going to be enough? Because, we didn't want to go through the process again later. So was that going to be enough? And yes, as has been stated already, it would pay off the debts that were vitally needed to be paid off as far as we were aware. It would also provide enough money for staff wages up to the end of the financial year. So that was quite clear, and I could give you that absolute assurance.
Thank you. And then finally, to Steve Brown. Again, thank you for the conversation we had the other day. You took over as interim director. It didn't last very long. I'd be interested to hear your observations on how you found Marketing Gloucester Limited and whether you thought the decision of the directors was right to fold the company at that particular time. But also, can I ask you, it's important that we have a destination marketing vehicle. I mean, I think that's all agreed by members, so that we need to sell the City of Gloucester to the wider public and to the people from outside the city. But I just wonder, what sort of model should we go ahead with now? Should we go back to something the same, or should we look to bring it in-house? And I wonder, are there any examples of good in-house council-run destination marketing organisations in the country that we could learn on? Because I think my concern is, to all of you, is if we were to follow on the same way, we might end up with the same problem. Because we had problems with Marketing Gloucester a few years ago, and then we tried to reset it, and it just still ended in financial failure. So it might be best to bring this sort of organisation in-house. And just wondering if you have any examples of successful organisations like that.
Sure, again, a number of points. So in turn, what did I find when I came to Marketing Gloucester? Well, the fact is I saw the company at its worst ebb. So it was inevitable that I wasn't brought in to run something that was going really smoothly. So naturally, in the 3 weeks that I had before the company was closed down, it wasn't a great time. Staff were at a low ebb. Things we were finding, people who were wanting to be paid their money was a big issue. So clearly I didn't. I've seen the company for just a tiny period of its operation. You asked whether the director's right to close the company. Well, I think as Jenny said earlier, legally they had no choice. Once it became clear that we couldn't meet the liabilities that we had and the creditors that we had, there was no choice but to close the company down. So yes, I think it was the right decision. I'm doing a piece of work at the moment, which should be concluded by the end of April, looking at how Gloucester should market itself in future. Not Marketing Gloucester, but the marketing of Gloucester. I'm looking at other DMOs around the company, and there's lots and lots of different models. So there are some really good examples of councils that do destination marketing themselves and do it really well. There's examples of companies like Marketing Gloucester that are being run very successfully and very commercially and aren't relying upon public subsidy to operate. There are councils that have contracted the services out. So there's probably 4 or 5 different things to have a look at, and by the end of April the plan is to come up with a series of options that everyone can have a look at and make the right decision for the future, because it just feels like madness that a city like Gloucester doesn't have some sort of marketing capability given the ambition of the city. So out of this needs to come a really positive solution. And they're out there. There will be a solution.
Okay. Thank you, Joe. Are there any more questions? Outside.
Following on from that, in the meantime, are we on track with our events, with the staff we've brought in on a temporary contract, with going out to other marketing companies to see if they can assist? Will all the events that we want to put on go through okay?
Certainly looking at the events that were put on last year, it is proving difficult because some of the information, financial information, operational information, we are struggling to get. But having said that, we have assembled a team who are actively looking, and this has only been going for about 3 weeks since these decisions were made. We've brought, as you may be aware, 4 of the former Marketing Gloucester staff into the City Council on a 3-month short-term contract to start moving forward, and this seems very successful. We're very positive on what we're doing. There were some obligations we've taken over from Marketing Gloucester in relation to some events that they contracted to produce in the city, and so we've taken up that mantle and we will be carrying on with those, and looking at the range of events that we want to put on, given the fact that we're not starting from ground zero, but we are starting from a difficult situation, but I am confident that we will produce a very good series of festivals and events across the city this summer and onto the rest of the year.
Any other questions from members?
Thanks, Chair. One final question. Was the senior manager, or when did the senior managers become aware? You kind of answered the question, but I don't think you answered it in full to my satisfaction. When did the senior managers become aware that Marketing Gloucester was in financial difficulties and the former chief exec had pleaded with senior managers that they wouldn't be able to deliver particular events? And what actions did the senior managers take to ensure that the events did continue and things, continued as in a positive light and successfully?
So I think the one bit of context I need to give you before I answer the detail of your question, which is that when the council made the decision to hand over the delivery of a number of events to Marketing Gloucester, an additional chunk of budget went to Marketing Gloucester from the City Council to deliver those events. Now that is around £160,000 of the sum that was given to Marketing Gloucester. The balance was to deliver other activities.
When was that?
When it was handed over, 13, 14. Don't quote me because I need to go back and check the files. But it was sometime around that when Marketing Gloucester was commissioned to deliver events for the City Council, and a chunk of additional resource went to Marketing Gloucester at that time. 160,000 broadly to deliver events. The council maintained very clearly that the cuts that were being made to Marketing Gloucester's grant were not cuts to that £160,000. That the £160,000 to deliver events before the cuts was still £160,000 to deliver events after the cuts. So that's the first bit of context. The second bit of context is that an independent review of the city's festivals and events was commissioned using some of Great Place money. And that review said that looking over the whole piece of a year's worth of events at Gloucester, there were some events which were important signature, flagship or growth events, and there were other events which were not particularly distinctive or were sort of very similar to what was being delivered elsewhere, and there was the potential for the council to sort of divest in those in order to grow others. So there was plenty of opportunity for Marketing Gloucester to have a conversation with the City Council about given our view of what the city needs, given the independent review, given the review of the views of councillors and cabinet, this is what we think next year's festivals and events structure should be. We received those recommendations from Marketing Gloucester, and they eventually found their way into a report to council. Your wider question about when did officers know, the question is how specific is the question. We were aware as officers, as a council and as a cabinet, I think as a council, that taking £100,000 a year for 2 years off Marketing Gloucester would present financial challenges. But we were challenged ourselves as a local authority, and we were passing that challenge on to some of our partner organisations as well, including Marketing Gloucester. We engaged with them about what are you going to do to reduce your costs, to increase your income, to do things differently in order to address that, and we didn't get a constructive and positive response from Marketing Gloucester, and we checked with Cabinet that they wanted to continue with that aspirational on savings, and they told us that they did. So we were always aware that that was a challenge. I think, as Anna said in her evidence, we became aware that things like creditors couldn't be paid, and HMRC, etc., couldn't be paid in September, October of this year, of 2019.
So prior to September 2019 then, you weren't the chief exec had not pleaded with you that we weren't going to be able to run certain events?
Yes, he had, and that's in the minutes of our various meetings. You see. But most of the organisations that we grant funded as a council told us that the results of cuts would be that they wouldn't be able to do as much in future years as they did in previous years. That sort of goes with the nature of grant reductions. But what the council was very clear about was that the 160,000 for events was continuing and wasn't reducing.
And take a final question from Kevin.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. It was a question to Steve Brown, actually. And firstly, welcome, and I'm very glad that we took the decision to keep you on an interim capacity, because we do need a destination management organisation going forward. And I certainly look forward to seeing the report that you produce. One of the key assurances I would think seek is it's not just for this council to be happy with the structure of the DMO going forward. It's going to be vitally important that that's got the wider confidence of the business community and other partner organisations. So I'm seeking an assurance that we will be taking on board the views of other organisations, because frankly the confidence, I think, of the business community in Marketing Gloucester, and to a certain extent this council, has been dented by what's happened. So we need to make sure that we rebuild that trust and confidence moving forward, and that we need to take that into account before we take any final decisions. I, for one, have got an open mind as to what exactly that structure looks like, and the views of other partners and businesses will be a key influence in the overall decision.
Sure. Well, just to reassure you, I spent an increasing amount of time now just talking to stakeholders, because you're absolutely right. I think whatever comes out of this, doesn't just have the support of the council, but has the support of the cultural community, the heritage community, the business community, and by the time the report will have been submitted, about 60 to 70 key people have been spoken to, so that's happening.
Thank you. Thank you. Can I thank the five of you for the evidence you given tonight? It has been helpful. I found something enlightening, so thank you for that, and I shall excuse you whilst we consider our recommendations. So, members, I hope you found that a useful experience. I certainly learned a lot, as I say, but now is the important is every part of the meeting is important. Now is an equally important part of the meeting where we must consider any recommendations we wish to put forward. So I will open that out to members and to invitations for any will start with Councillor Wilson, Joe Councillor Stevens, Councillor Wilson.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. One recommendation I would like to propose is that when this whole process is finally over as regards the winding up of the company, etc., that we get a report back to scrutiny on how the grant money was actually spent, it was properly accounted for and was appropriately used. Because this was one of the main recommendations of Grant Thornton, and because of events that have happened since then, it's clearly not going to happen. But I think we need to know ourselves, we need to have a statement of comfort, if you like, that it was all done appropriately and properly accounted for. Thank you.
So you're saying that when the insolvency process is over, there should be a report to the Review and Scrutiny Committee about how grant money was used and accounted for?
Yes.
Is there any dissent from that recommendation? Do I need to put it to a vote, or are we unanimously agreed?
Makes sense.
Unanimously agreed. Councillor Stevens.
Yeah, a couple of recommendations, I think, which came largely out of the debate. Firstly, that we do ask the Cabinet to review the whistleblowing procedures, particularly with regard to tech companies. Secondly, that in light of what's happened, we review existing agreements and SLAs and performance management frameworks to make sure that they are as tight as can be for existing contracts that are in place. That we look again at the role of councillors on boards. And in terms of the report which Steve Brown has drawn up, I think it would be very useful if that could come to scrutiny before it went to Cabinet, and I'm sure that it will include, but I would very much like to see what the terms of reference are going to be for the new DMO, because that was one of the problems with MGL and the terms of reference, and also a budget included. And I think that that should come here before it goes to Cabinet. Please go by Force Chair.
So I'm just trying to make sure I write them down properly. So you're saying firstly that Cabinet should review whistleblowing procedures with respect to tech companies.
Not just, but particularly
with particular respect to tech companies.
I was not looking at that.
That we review SLAs and performance management frameworks we have with other partner organisations. Yes. That we review the role of councillors on boards of other organisations and provide a report into the future of destination management should come to overview and scrutiny.
Yes. Including the terms of reference and budget.
Anyone got any issues with any of those?
I'd just like to make a comment about the councillors' involvement. I do think there ought to be councillor involvement as an oversight, but not as a chairman.
I think the review would...
I think the review would say that, but that's what I would suggest. Yeah, I know, yeah. But it just, it seems to it compromises the council's position too much. You know, it's like getting too involved, this sort of thing, if you want to do it. And our sort of thing, you want to...
I'm just saying we look at it.
Yeah. Do I need to put anything else for vote before we unanimously? I'd like to make a recommendation that when we enter into future arrangements with partner organisations, there are robust access to information policies in place between them and the council. And I'd further like to make propose the recommendation that when we enter into such arrangements, there are clear guidelines about expectations for reporting to overview and scrutiny where appropriate. Would anybody disagree with either of those? In which case we have a set of
Chair, just a point about councillors on board. Yeah. I think we also ought to be looking at it. I'm in favour, I think, of councillors being on boards of companies. What I think is the big issue is the conflict of interest that councillors could have by being on the board. And that was mentioned by Councillor James in his reply to me in council. The reason why he stepped down was the perceived conflict of interest. And I think what we need to make sure is that anybody who is sitting on a board doesn't have that conflict of interest, particularly if they're in the executive or the leader of the council.
So by my count we have a set of 7 good recommendations which I've made a note of. Yes, which we've unanimously agreed and which will go forward. So we've come to the end of the meeting, and if you will indulge me very briefly, we live in an age of political uncertainty, but one thing is certain, it won't be me sitting in this chair, whatever the results of the elections are after May, and you know, this isn't how I would have liked my last meeting after 4 years to be, but I think at least it has been a constructive one. So I'd just like to take this opportunity as my last to thank the officers who supported me throughout the past 4 years, particularly Tanya, Miranda, Simon. There have been lots of other students, David Rice. It's dead all that says about me, that was through so many officers. There we are.
Chair, before we close the meeting, could I see
I'd also like to thank Councillor Ryle, who's been Vice Chair for 4 years, and we both came into this as newly elected councillors, with me as Chair, never having heard of ONS, and Emily never heard of nobody, so I'd like to thank her. I've had numerous spokespeople from the Conservative group, so Andy, thank you for stepping in more recently. Thank you, Councillor Vivian Pearson as well. And I've worked with some of you for the duration of my time as Chair of Scrutiny, some of you for a shorter period, but thank you to you all for your contributions over the past 4 years, and good luck to all of you who are really standing in the upcoming elections.
Yeah, I'd like to see you close before we close. It is your last meeting as Chair, and I'm sure the committee will wish to record its thanks for the highly professional way in which you've conducted this meeting. You've always strenuously, I think, tried to be fair, and you've always tried to keep it apolitical and been hugely successful in that. So I'll certainly miss you when you've gone, and a very big thank you for what you've done. And yeah, I agree with you, it is a team that leads this committee, so also the same applies to everybody, Andy, Colette and Fritz, at the time. So thank you very much for your contribution.
Thank you. Your next meeting will be on the 15th of June. Good luck.